Hi there, welcome to this module on ESXi post-installation configurations. Um, I would like to just talk a little bit about some of the theoretical stuff that we'll be covering in this module, and then we'll go back to the DCUI and make some configurations as well on the vSphere client to make some configurations to our NTP client. Okay, so let's get started with this. Some of the things we would have discussed already. So by default, once your ESXi host comes up and you have a DHCP server in your environment, it would automatically pull an IP address there. But in our case, we would have went in that interface and at least assign a gateway and IP address to our management interface. As I mentioned too previously, the default disk on our ESXi host is formatted with the virtual machine file system. That becomes our default data store there. And these are basically some of the things we could configure in the DCUI, but we'll get to the interface in a little bit and we would go through most of these here. Okay, so let's just move on from here. Okay, as I mentioned, we could do a password configuration, changing the password on the DCUI. Lockdown mode. This is basically if this box was joined to a vCenter server for centralized management there. We could configure this mode if we want the host to manage only through the vCenter server and disable direct access to it. We have our management network configuration. We have an option too to restore the network. Say you made a lot of changes and now you can't get over back through your management network, we could always restore that. We have a couple options for troubleshooting and login too. And finally, you have an option there where you could reset the entire configuration of the box. So let's move on from here. NTP, we would log in with the vSphere client. This is the only config actually that I want to work on in the vSphere desktop client. All the other configurations we'll do through the web client once we have the vCenter server up. So basically the ESXi host would be the NTP client and this would sync to an NTP source. So in this case, I have a Windows box that where we took a look at that earlier, where we managed some records in DNS. Excuse me. So we'll use that same box as our standalone NTP server. I'll just go through a quick configuration on that so you guys will have an idea. NTP basically communicates over UDP port 123. Just a little side note there. And these are some of the reasons basically why we would want to configure proper time in our environment, in our vSphere environment. I mean, we have lots of graphs, performance graphs when we deploy the vCenter Operations Manager, those sort of stuff. So we need an accurate source for our time. For our timestamp and log messages, excuse me, we'll need that to be accurate too. So that's another reason. And basically overall to have our VM to sync to a time source. So let me get to the DCUI. So let's pull up back ESXi 5 that we just deployed. Okay, so I'm going to log in here by hitting F2. Okay, so our username root. Let me just enter this password really fast. So once we're in this interface, let's start from the top. So if we need to change our password, just hit enter on this here. So we'll enter our old password, enter a new one, and confirm that as if we want to change that. We don't want to do that right now. This box was not joined to vCenter server as yet, so we don't have the option to configure the lockdown mode, but later we'll come back to this. For configuring our management network, we went through a couple of these before. If you had multiple NICs in here and you were connected to the wrong one, for example, you could, or if you're trying to set up a Ether channel or of some sort, you could manage your physical adapters in here too. So let me just exit out back from this. If you have VLAN in your network and your management network was running over a particular VLAN, you would need to configure that here. So for now, we'll just leave this as it is, since I don't have any VLAN going on here. This is what we would have looked at before. Our couple options on the management interface. We have here dynamic IP address here. We could disable the IPv4 configuration, or we set it static like we are doing in our case. So let's exit out of that. IPv6. These are the config if we are running IPv6 on our network. Bear in mind though, if we disable this, we'll need a restart, so let's not mess around with that there. For our DNS configuration, this is our primary DNS server. We could add an alternate here. Let me just do that really fast. For our host name, let's just put in our host name. So this is for name resolution for this host. Let's add her host name that we configured previously. So this is my domain. Okay. And then we could add our custom DNS suffix here too. So let's go ahead and do that too. Okay, so this would require a restart of our management network. So I'll go ahead and do that once I escape out of this here. So I'll hit Y onto this. So we accepted that. This is if you manually want to restart the management network, you could hit that here too. So we'll just not do that right now. Here we could test our settings that we would have configured so far for our management network. So it does a couple ping here. So we could ping our gateway, we could ping our DNS server, try to resolve our host name and stuff like that. So we'll go ahead really fast and do this. So if I hit enter here, should come back, call being okay. Okay, great. So that's for testing our management network. Coming down in the list here, we have a restore network option, or network restore options. If we need to restore our network settings, this is here where we will do that. If something went really bad, we could just come back here and reset this, or restore that, sorry. Coming down in the list here, this is where we'll set our keyboard layout, and below that we have our troubleshooting options. We would need access to the shell later in the series, so seeing that we're in here, we might as well just enable this. Hitting enter on that would enable the ESXi shell, and for remote access into this, we'll just enable SSH too. Here we have a timeout for DCUI. We can set this here. This is done in minutes, so you'll put in your number or how much minutes you want that there, so we could set that. Then moving downwards, we have our management agent. This is where we'll restart if you ever need to restart the management agent on this host. So let's go out back from that. When we cover in the third course, when we cover the monitoring and troubleshooting of the vSphere environment, we'll come back to some of these things more in detail. This is where you would just access your logs. If you look at the right side here, you have 1 to 6. So if we need to just view our syslog, we just hit 1, and that will bring up that. Just hit quit to exit this. Support information. We get some small details here. We'll take a look back at this when we're joining our ESXi host to the domain. And if you need to restore or reset everything on this box to default, this is where we'll do that. Okay, so for right now we're not going to do that. Let me just exit out back from here. Okay, so there is one more thing, well, two more things I wanted to discuss. Let me just pull up our vCenter, our vSphere client, sorry. Let me just get that up here. Okay, so a couple things. I'm under configuration here. If we go over to configuration software at the bottom here, DNS and routing, those same information that we configured for DNS in the DCUI, we have them here. So we could make those same configuration back in here. So if you notice, we have static DNS, that's our prefer and alternate DNS server, our domain, our host name there, and domain there. So that's one thing I wanted to show you guys here. Another is the time configuration. This is where we enable and configure the NTP client. So for us to make any configuration changes in here, we'll need to come into properties. Under properties, let's just enable our client. We'll go into options. We want this service to start and stop with the host, so we do that there. Before we could actually start the service, we need to enter the IP address for one of our NTP server. So let's just do that. So here I'll enter that. So we got that covered there. Okay, so once I OK out of this, this should start polling from our server. Okay, let's just give it a couple seconds. Okay, great. So we have our time configured there. One more thing I wanted to show you guys here. If I come under security profile and under firewall, if I go into the properties here, we would see now that your NTP client, let me just see, the outgoing port is now open here and the service is running. Previously this was disabled in the firewall, so it automatically creates that opening for us there.